Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today on Monday, June 13th, 2016. Before this committee moves forward, we're probably the first committee that would come into session following the tragic news yesterday of what occurred in Orlando, Florida. And I think that there are a lot of thoughts and ideas that we have. I want to express first that the committee is going to take an opportunity to express not only our sorrow for what occurred, the families, the loss of life, the carnage, the community of Orlando, Florida that has been scarred, the worst act of terrorism as a mass shooting. The Congress tomorrow will have a classified briefing where we will learn more about not only perhaps the facts of the case, but also about the perpetrator and some of the information. I just want to express, as chairman of the committee, my sincere sorrow for the people of this country who once again are faced with this international problem and a problem on our doorstep. I'd like to think that I have some of the answers, but I think we do as a body. And I think it's going to take us as a body getting closer by hearing the facts of the case. But today is a day pending that knowledge for us to appropriately thank the families for the lives that they were a part of, and as they move forward in their grief, to let them know that we care deeply about that. Before I move forward, I want to allow the Vice Chairman of the committee, the gentlewoman, Mrs. Fox, for any comments she'd like to make, and then I'd like to go to Mrs. Slaughter, our ranking member, and then allow any member of the committee to make a statement as they choose about this, and then we will come directly to our witnesses that are here today. Mrs. Fox, you're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It is really a grievous situation that has occurred in Orlando, and I appreciate the comments you've made. I think what most of us have said is that we're praying for the families. We're terribly sorry about the victims, And we do need to condemn in the strongest terms possible the loss of innocent life and the terrorist attacks. It's just so difficult to understand how somebody could be filled with hatred so much toward another human being. It's very difficult to deal with. And I appreciate also the people who are having to deal with the situation, the doctors and the first responders and the people like that. And I think we should really pray for them, because I talked to somebody this morning who'd been in the military who said he'd been around a situation where 2 or 3 people had died, and he thought of himself as a pretty, strong person, and it had brought him to tears. And so having to be around where so many people have been killed has got to be very tough psychologically. So I'm very, very sorry. I appreciate you stopping the meeting or beginning the meeting this way and saying we all need to be praying for each other in this situation, and praying that such acts of barbarity can somehow be stopped here and elsewhere. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate very much, like all parents, grandparents, citizens of this country, I really cannot believe that we are facing another one. Since Sandy Hook, there have been 998 mass shootings in the United States. We have a population here of 330 million, and in this country are 320 million guns. 50% of all the guns in the world are in the United States. Now, I come from a family of hunters. I must have said that 100 times in here. First rule at the McIntosh Boone Ramsey houses, where you didn't shoot anything you weren't going to have for dinner. Boy, how nice it would be if we could get to some of that. But there are things that we can do. I think some of the things that I've heard, first I want to say the phenomenal medical facilities and what they've done, the numbers of operations they did in those hospitals. They haven't lost a single soul. And some of the wounds that I have heard of have been so appallingly bad. To shoot the calves off the legs, lower arms, because he was shooting, they thought he would never stop, because he had a repeating rifle, an automatic military gun. And we could stop people from being able to buy those. And I would think, certainly in my mind anyway, somebody who has been interrogated 3 times by the FBI should have been on a list somewhere, and not to let him have those. He had tried to buy Type 3 body armor, military body armor, which would have protected him almost from a cannon, and he could have gone on much longer. But the store that was selling that, and I'm not sure why we'd sell those either, refused to sell to him. We haven't been able to find out what kind of list he's on. It does make me think again about a bill we can never get passed here, and that is not to sell guns and dangerous weapons to people who are on the no-fly list, people we think with terrorist backgrounds. It's surely we could do that. But I've got a statement here that we've put together so that I won't cry. Okay, I want to take a moment to mark the horrific loss of life over the weekend in Orlando, Florida. This mass shooting is the largest in American history. 49 murdered, 53 injured. And of course, the shooter was killed. Now, countless others impacted forever by this violence. Think what it was like for those people on the floor doing anything they could to try to save their lives, to make phone calls to their families saying, I'm going to die. And from what we hear, there was an awful lot of that. There's a parent, you're there, there's not a thing you can do. Not a single thing you can do. You would hope somehow that your country might give you a decent chance, that it wouldn't turn out to be a hunting gallery and a place where they're having some fun, enjoying each other's company. We're still learning the details of exactly what happened, but the entire nation is shaken once again, but we seem to get over it pretty quickly. So I imagine we will. But I think that people deserve and expect Congress to have a conversation about what really happened here and what, if anything, can be done to prevent this type of violence from ever happening again. It shouldn't be that the last time our loved ones leave home, the last time we see them, that there is a possibility we might ever see them again because of gunshot. And that's happened to so many Americans in this country who sent their children off to elementary school, 6 years old, in temples, in churches, in many schools, the people who were worshiping in South Carolina. None of them they all expected to go home and continue their lives. Their families did too. But instead, they're planning funerals and the rest of their lives with that person gone from it. We do need to know why the FBI interviewed them 3 times and found nothing, apparently, but I don't know that. We'll try to find out, and I do want to go to the briefing. But I did hear Mr. Comey say today that he didn't have enough resources to keep him under surveillance. Now, undoubtedly, on the floor tomorrow, we'll have a moment of silence to mourn the loss of life, but we need more than that. We need more than moments of silence. We need some action. I have stood on the floor too many times to mark a mass shooting. And I know they must be very gratified by our prayers and our thoughts. But it's just really time for us to give them more. After Sandy Hook, we said never again. Since then, as I said before, there have been 998, that's close to 1,000, mass shootings just since Sandy Hook. That's an unconscionable number, and we sweep it under the rug. But I think it represents a failure of this Congress to act. Every time we all stand up on the floor, we're the people who have the ability to change it. We're the people who have the votes that could make the difference. Now, this Congress has time for degrading the environment and repeals Obamacare 60 times and time for resolutions that aren't going anywhere, but what it doesn't have time to do is discuss the safety of our citizens. I think the violence epidemic is crippling this nation. I know that life has changed so much for so many people in small towns where these awful things happen and nobody knows why. And then we go on with our lives. Now, we do need some more, I think, than thoughts and prayers, as I said before, how important those are, because in many, many times in everybody's life, the only thing in the world that ever gives us any hope and solace is prayer. But we need now, for the victims, for the families, for the people we serve, for the United States of America, we need action and law. I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking this moment in acknowledgement of our committee being the first institutional committee to meet here since this unprecedented tragedy and loss of life. I hope that our focus remains on the fellowship of love that has gone out to the victims and their families, the city of Orlando in their time of need. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community has been particularly hard hit by this shocking event. But an affront against any American, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, is really an affront on all Americans and an attack on all Americans. And as Americans, we've been victim of an act of terror in Orlando. And I hope and look forward to being briefed on this tomorrow. A thorough investigation with regard to whether there were any international terrorism aspects to this and what steps we can take to prevent future crimes, not only against the LGBT community, but against our entire homeland. And I hope that our voices of solidarity and love and fellowship are heard by those in need and those in mourning in this very difficult hour for the families that are affected. And I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Judge Hastings?
Mr. Chairman, are any of our Republican colleagues?
I'm sure they will, sir. I was trying to go back.
All right. I just was being respectful
I was not trying to jump over
of-
you, and I
yeah.
did not see you.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I was born 10 miles north of the Pulse nightclub in a little town called Altamont Springs. Like Mrs. Slaughter, I grew up with great respect for weapons. I owned a Roy Ryder BB gun when I was 7 years old. My dad bought me a single-shot .22 rifle when I was 12 years old. Almost all the boys in my hometown understood that you don't point weapons at people, and I don't recall a single time any one of us, no matter our anger or our little fist fights, decided that we wanted to get a gun. There was always a shotgun in my house. I believe in the Second Amendment. I absolutely do not believe that anyone other than the military or police officers should have an assault weapon. I don't care what kind of enthusiast a person is. It makes no sense for the type magazines that are perpetuating themselves into our society. By now, we've all heard the gruesome details of this one appalling event. This shooting is the deadliest mass shooting in United States history. It was an act of hate and an act of terrorism, and it was perpetrated, in this instance, against the LGBTQ community. I know this body will, in the coming days, take time to condemn this attack. We'll hold moments of silence and discuss this atrocity in committee and on the House floor and have a classified briefing, as you have said, Mr. Chairman. I might add, we would probably learn as much reading the Washington Times and the New York Times as we're going to learn at a classified briefing. But for years, Democrats have called for reforms to our nation's lax approach to firearms through common sense actions supported by the vast majority of Americans. Ms. Slaughter and Mr. McGovern and you, Mr. Chairman, and I were here when we passed an assault weapons ban. Chuck Schumer, who is now in the Senate, was in the House of Representatives and led that charge. And since that time, the calls about common sense gun action have gone unanswered by the House majority. All the while, we've suffered shooting after shooting. Virginia Tech, Newton, Charleston, Oak Creek, Chattanooga, San Bernardino, and now Orlando. The list is larger than that. Ms. Slaughter pointed out 900 plus identifiable mass shootings in recent times. But I need to ask the majority, what are we going to do? We cannot deny the severity of this epidemic. A man that we pretty much ran out of town, Mr. Satcher, Dr. Satcher, identified gun violence as an epidemic and thought that we should approach it from that standpoint. And he was criticized all over the place for saying that as Surgeon General, we had exacting responsibilities in the health field, mental health, as well as the epidemic of violence in our society. And while the majority, and I want to make it clear that there are some members in the Democratic Party that are also afraid of the National Rifle Association. And while the majority continuously argues that we need to be tougher on terrorism, and we should, Republican leadership's approach to guns is so backwards that you allow people like this man, who was at one time on a watch list, to buy assault weapons, and the NRA has stood allowing that people like this are able to buy assault weapons. What sense does it make? Democrats continue to try to change this, some of us, and we continue to get blocked by the majority and a few of us on our side. For months I've been saying that Congress is becoming increasingly culpable for gun violence in America. On the flight on JetBlue coming here today, 3 people approached me, all women, and all of them asked in a different way, what are you all going to do and why haven't you done something? Perhaps we've reached a point where our culpability is no longer in question. It's not the people in America that don't want change. It's the people in Congress that don't want change. After Sandy Hook, when 26 first-grade children were murdered, this body did nothing. After Tucson, an attack focused on one of our own colleagues at the time took place, and this body did nothing. After Charleston 1 year ago this week, in a church where people were killed, this body did nothing. Virginia, Colorado, San Diego, nothing. American cities are tearing themselves apart, and this body continues to do nothing. More than 30,000 people in our country are killed by guns every year. It escapes me, how do we still lack the courage to act? So let me yield back to you, Mr. Chairman, and ask you and the majority, do you support bringing common sense gun control reform legislation to the floor immediately? Do you believe that we should be keeping guns out of the hands of suspected terrorists and ensure that all background checks are strengthened, whether they're at gun shows or otherwise? This nation has seen too much bloodshed, and something needs to happen and happen now. I'm personally no longer going to participate by standing in moments of silence where gun violence is involved, not out of disrespect for the victims, but because there's absolutely too much silence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the gentleman. Does any Republican seek time? The gentleman, Mr. Collins.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the moment. I appreciate the time. This is a time for questions, surely, and a time for answers, but also at a certain point is one on this dais who has struggled with these questions and delivering the news that a loved one who once did leave the front door did not come home, and dealing with the whys and the whats. It is a time at this point, I appreciate all that has been said, but I'll also say this. There's a time that evil showed its face again. Evil in a heart that is turned to the point in which one would believe that a life does not have value. I cannot legislate against an evil heart. I cannot legislate against a mind that is determined to do ill. Those are conflicts and discussions for another day. But at this point, as bodies have just recently even been removed, as families are just coming to grips with an issue of a mad man, then the question for us, and at least in my faith perspective, is families that are hurting need one and one thing only, and that is the support and love of a body that says all people matter, that life is precious. None of us in this room are promised tomorrow. It is a reminder for us to say, I love you. It is a reminder for us to say, I am sorry. It is a reminder of us to be forgiving. And as we do that, then that is the way life is respected. But the evil deeds of a madman need to be called exactly what they are. And when we do that, we respect the lives of those that are no longer living, and we respect the lives of the family members who now must live without that part of them, so delicate to their heart, that they are so tendered right now, that they will search for any answer. But the answer that we must give is that evil has showed itself again, and our hearts and our minds must be turned toward healing of those. The other questions will come, but to do any less is a disservice to those who have died. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. Gentleman, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you. The attack yesterday was an attack on everybody in America, every one of us, no question about it. Islamic terrorism hates LGBT people. Islamic terrorism hates Christians like me, and they will stop at absolutely nothing to take every one of us out if they could. Hate is not an American virtue. Hate is against everything that we stand for in this country. And so it's a time like these when we need to stand together and not turn on one another and work together to defend the people of this country. I struggled with how I was going to explain this to people in my district yesterday when I made my statement. And I said this, and I strongly believe it, that whatever this person believed about what his conception of God was telling him to do, what he did was an affront to God, because every one of those people were God's creation, and they were precious to God. And for somebody to think that it's in keeping with what God's plan is for all of us, that it's okay to kill them, there's something wrong with his mindset, and there's something wrong with the mindset from which it springs. We're going to have a lot of questions as a Congress over the next weeks and months about what happened here and how it got to this point. But we need to take ever more seriously the threat that's posed to this country and every person in this country by people who parade themselves around as Islamists, but who are in fact a radical ideology that's against everything that doesn't agree with them 100%, and they will stop at absolutely nothing to kill all the rest of us. And it's our job as members of this Congress to do a better job to protect the American people. I grieve with every one of the friends and family members of the people who died, and I'm praying for the people who are wounded and are trying to get through their wounds. And I agree with Ms. Fox, the incredible doctrine that we've seen here is really awe-inspiring. But I hope that we can work together in the days to come as a Congress to make sure we protect the American people. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member that seeks time? Now I'd like the committee, if they can, to take a moment of silence, remembering the lives, the families, the men and women who were viciously gunned down in Florida, and would ask that we take a moment of silence. Thank you very much. I will be writing a letter to the mayor of Orlando, Florida, Mr. Buddy Dyer, to let him know that this committee has taken time to appropriately acknowledge the lives of the people of his community, and ask that he understand that we will welcome his feedback to us also as he chooses to do so. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to move forth with my opening statement. Today, the committee will be considering H.R. 5053, the Preventing IRS Abuse and Protecting Free Speech Act, and H.R. 5293, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act of 2017. H.R. 5293 funds our nation's national defense and provides the resources necessary to continue our essential military efforts abroad, as well as here at home, to protect the United States of America, our people, and our allies. With the rise of ISIS, the continued presence of al-Qaeda, the growth of terrorist groups in North Africa, and instability in many other regions around the world, I think it's imperative that the United States military and intelligence community have the resources and tools necessary to complete their missions not only at home but also abroad. A well-equipped, well-trained, effective military for the common defense of our country is in the interest of all Americans. The committee will also consider H.R. 5053, legislation that eliminates a burdensome and invasive reporting requirement for nonprofit organizations dealing with the Internal Revenue Service. The legislation protects the personal information of donors and limits the Internal Revenue Service's ability to target organizations based on improper criteria and improperly related information. I believe it is important that we are addressing this issue on behalf of not just some groups that have been targeted, but groups in the future that could be targeted off inappropriate criteria. I want to thank the gentleman, Peter Roscom, the subcommittee chairman. We've been advised that Ranking Member Levin cannot be joining us today. Mrs. Slaughter is aware of that. So without objection, anything in writing will be entered to the record. And I know Mrs. Slaughter will be participatory in what we do today. We will also welcome the gentleman from the chairman, subcommittee chairman, Mr. Rodley Freelandheisen, and also Mr. Vikoski, who will be here today to present the Defense Authorization, Defense Appropriations Act of 2017. Does the gentlewoman seek any time?
Thank you. No, I'm just anxious to hear from Mr. Roscom.
Thank you very much. We will proceed in that manner. Mr. Roscom, we're going to have you come to the dais. Without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered in the record. I want to thank the gentleman for being here, and the gentleman is now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions and Ranking Member Slaughter. Every year, tax-exempt 501c organizations fill out and send Form 990 to the IRS. This publicly available form describes the purpose and activities of the 501c organization, and it's used by the IRS to review the organization's activities and eligibility for tax-exempt status. So far, so good. Makes perfect sense to disclose that information. Under current law, 501c organizations must also fill out Schedule B on Form 990. Now, Schedule B contains the names and information of any donor who's given the organization $5,000 or more in a calendar year. But unlike the underlying 990 form, this information isn't used for tax administration. Still, tax-exempt organizations are required to complete this burdensome form, and unlike Form 990, Schedule B is never made public, or at least it's not supposed to be. In the past, the IRS has improperly accessed and released to the public information from a tax-exempt group's Schedule B. Most notably, the National Organization for Marriage had its Schedule B leaked to the press in 2012. We've also seen a move at the state level to require organizations to publicly disclose the Schedule B. The state of California, for example, tried to require the Americans for Prosperity Foundation to disclose its Schedule B, but in April, a U.S. District Court judge ruled that not only was this disclosure a violation of the First Amendment, but it was not necessary for tax enforcement. The judge's order stated, and I quote, "It's clear that the Attorney General's purported Schedule B submission requirement demonstrably played no role in advancing the Attorney General's law enforcement goals for the past 10 years," end quote. Further, the court found that the organization suffered irreparable harm and that the Schedule B disclosure requirement places donors in fear of exercising their First Amendment right. To put an end to this issue once and for all, I'm pleased to bring for your consideration the Preventing IRS Abuse and Protecting Free Speech Act. The bill prohibits the IRS from collecting donor information on the Schedule B form. To prevent fraud and self-dealing, directors and officers and the 5 highest paid employees will still be reported if they themselves donate $5,000 or more to the organization. This is a common sense bill, and I hope you'll support it. Schedule B is not needed for tax administration. In fact, Commissioner Koskinen and the Director of Tax-Exempt Organizations, Ruperta, have both publicly indicated that they were considering eliminating the requirement themselves. Tax-exempt groups should not be forced to expend precious resources on unnecessary documentation and tax administration rather than focusing on their charitable missions. The IRS has not demonstrated the capacity to safeguard confidential information in the past, and there's no reason that we should send this more sensitive information that they need to do their job. I urge your favorable consideration and stand ready to respond to your inquiries.
Mr. Roscom, thank you. I happen to agree with you. I believe that the mission statement of the organization and their efforts as they produce whatever they do is what the IRS should be looking at, not who funded them. I think that what you're seeing is a target list. I think the Internal Revenue Service has been accused of utilizing this information in the past. I think that we became aware of this when evidently you know the facts better than I. I'll let you state the facts, but there have been presidential candidates who had 100% of their major donors under certain parameters who received an IRS audit as a result of some contributions that they made to organizations. I think it's scurrilous that the Internal Revenue Service would be engaged in this behavior, and I think that from a perspective of management, to take away a weapon that even Mr. Koskinen, the commissioner, believes they should not utilize, we should help him out. I'd like to see him do that because if he believes it's the right thing. But I think Congress should have a say about that, where we see a weapon that was used inappropriately and the management be a part of trying to correct that too. So I'll let you amplify that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your expression of support. I think in a nutshell, this bill comes down to a couple things. Number one, the IRS has demonstrated an inability to hold these things close. And the proof of that is their disclosure of the National Organization for Marriage information. That was disclosed inappropriately, illegally. There was injury to the organization. Their donors were hassled. And you can imagine, I mean, that's a conservative organization, but you can imagine the hassle of a liberal group being subject to the same thing. So this is not, you know, this is one of these things where I think that we, as a bipartisan group, can say, let's come up with a fair set of rules that make sense. So number one, the IRS has demonstrated a lack of capacity in the past. Number two, as chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee at Ways and Means, we have had a lot of discussions with the Internal Revenue Service, public hearings and so forth about their inability to hold current information close. That is, think about all your constituents who are coming to you recently saying, my identity has been stolen. I haven't been able to file my tax return. It's a mess, and so forth. And the IRS is quick to acknowledge they don't have the identity theft situation under control. They don't have the cybersecurity thing under control. So it begs the question, if they don't have those things under control, how is it that we have an expectation that they hold Schedule B close? We don't have an expectation because they've blown it in the past. And then finally, the commissioner himself has acknowledged publicly that they're considering taking, moving away from this. And the argument is they don't need it from a tax administration point of view. So I think it makes perfect sense, and I'll yield.
Two questions, and I'll defer to the gentleman from Oklahoma. The first question is, does the IRS commissioner, do you believe the IRS commissioner has the ability to make this decision in his running of the Internal Revenue Service?
He does. So right now, it's promulgated by rule. And so obviously, as the entity historically that created the Internal Revenue Service, we've got the ability to dictate to this creature of Congress, that is the IRS, how they go about doing their business. But in answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, yes, the IRS currently has the authority to move away from Schedule B, which is why the commissioner said that they were contemplating it.
Purely conjecture unless you have something to back it up. Why is it that all the Republicans voted for this and all the Democrats voted against it?
It's a curiosity to me. I thought it was going to be the same coalition that came together around the gift tax bill. Remember this, where
Yes.
both the political left and the political right came together last year and said, we're really troubled by the idea of the IRS sending letters out to donors threatening them that their contributions to an entity have become a taxable event. So we were able to put together a very broad coalition. And I mean, the entire political spectrum came together and said, we're not going to be sitting around and letting the IRS tax our donors. Now, I thought that that was the same approach that we were going to be able to take on this, and I can't necessarily speak. Maybe Ms. Slaughter will have some of the counter arguments. But for the life of me, I don't understand the thinking that says that you want an organization that has demonstrably, in the past, been complicit with targeting. When a new administration comes in, why could anybody say, let's give this same entity that has lost so much confidence more information. Doesn't make sense to me.
I would have thought we both lived in the same glass house together. That shows how much I know. Thank you very much. Very proud of this. You can count on me voting for the bill. Thank you.
Gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
I don't really have any questions. I want to thank the gentleman for the legislation, though. I think it addresses a real problem. And government accumulates so much information on all of us, on every citizen, that whenever we have an opportunity to say, you really don't need this for any purpose at all, we ought to take that opportunity. And as my friend pointed out, this is an agency that has a lot to answer for over how it's been run and conducted. I wouldn't say, but sometimes opinions on these things seem to change in odd and even-numbered years. And it's harder to find common ground on an even-numbered year, and that's true on both sides. Don't level that on either side. But this is one, really, that is just simply the agency doesn't need the information for the purpose that it's to fulfill. And I think we ought to give every American a break, left or right, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, and say we're going to make sure that you have as much right to participate without fear of retaliation by an official agency in any way you care to, and we're going to make darn sure that people don't accumulate information and have no purpose for that information, but which can be put to dangerous use, and again, can be used against anybody. And once that information is there, administrations come and go, parties change their position in power. It's just a dangerous thing to have in one location where it can be abused. And I know my friends share that point of view, and I hope in the course of the debate maybe we can find a little more common ground than we were able to in committee. But regardless, my friend is to be commended for the legislation. I think it's much more than just dealing with a particular agency that's got a problem of abusing the citizens it's supposed to serve. It's really about protecting freedom. It's really about protecting the individual from the power of the state. And that's all individuals, regardless of their points of view or their political persuasion. So I thank my friend. I look forward to supporting his legislation on the floor, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cole. The gentlewoman, Mrs. Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Roscoe. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Rules. I think ever since that woman whose name escapes me headed the IRS,
Lois Lerner.
Lois Lerner, and
Right.
let me state for the record that everything I saw from her and heard from her showed she was totally incompetent to do that job. So I want to state that up front. But the idea that came out of that is that the conservative wing of the country was so desperately abused that something had to be done. And this reminds me a lot of all the Benghazi committees, 9 of them, and I don't know how many on fetal tissue research. Totally unnecessary, not true. Let me tell you, the Inspector General had studied that. That one issue there was favoritism shown or animus shown toward one of the groups, either the conservatives or the others. And they found no. The FBI investigated, and they said no difference, no discernible difference. The Oversight and Government Reform Committees of this House did the same thing, as did Ways and Means, and both of them found there was no difference. And then the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations found the same thing, and the Senate Finance Committee. Mr. Roscoe, I know you're all reluctant to give up what sounds like a good story, but isn't it time you put that one to rest?
Well, I would differ in your characterization in this way.
Yeah.
So the Ways and Means Committee came to the conclusion that Lois Lerner wasn't incompetent. The Ways and Means Committee made the conclusion that she committed a crime, and we voted out.
She was never charged with
No,
that.
no, so that's my
Well,
point.
then, the idea that you want to put that on the record, she committed a crime.
Oh, that's what the House voted on. So the House
But
made a
it-
criminal referral. Mr. Chairman, I just
I
don't
freely
know.
give you that this woman, the way she stumbled through testimony, her seemed inability to know what they were doing over there, and then the Fifth Amendment, by that time, I was pretty sure she did not know how to run that agency.
Well-
But as far as crime, I don't think anything ever came to it. They may have tried to. But the fact is, that's not the point. The point is that all these committees and the FBI and the Inspector General that I mentioned to you thoroughly looked into this. Just as 9 committees have thoroughly looked into Benghazi. And as you know, that 2 of your most respected people I appreciate very much, Congressman McEwen, who's no longer here, Congressman McCall, both said there's nothing about Benghazi, right? Do you remember that? You remember they said that? There was
Well,
nothing wrong there.
so are you treating me now as a hostile witness where you're drawing me in?
No, I'm not treating you as a witness at all. I'm trying to make the point here that I do believe that this again, with all the evidence to the contrary, you keep saying the same thing over again as though that makes it right.
Okay, let me stipulate, just for the sake of argument. Let's
Okay.
assume for the sake of argument, and I don't agree with it, but let's assume for the sake of argument that you're right. Let's focus then in on this bill. And what this bill says is this information shouldn't go to anybody. Why? Because they don't need it. Why don't they need it? They've admitted they don't need it. And why would we give the federal government information that
Mr. Ross,
doesn't
you've
need?
made it clear, and so I think the chair did too, although I was occupied with something else I was reading, that the whole premise of this was the Lois Lerner problem.
It absolutely is, but I'm
Well,
stipulating.
if there was nothing there, if everybody found out that everybody was maltreated
But
by
we came
this
to very
lady.
different conclusions. So in other words.
No,
what I'm-
but your personal conclusion?
Well, the conclusion of the House when it made a criminal referral to the Department of Justice, the conclusion of the Ways and Means Committee when it marked up a criminal referral. When's the last time that's happened?
No, the information that I've got is the Inspector General, the FBI, the Oversight and Government Reform of this House, the Ways and Means Committee of this House, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and the Senate Finance Committees all concluded that she didn't know how to run the IRS and that she didn't treat anybody right.
That's
the same way.
inaccurate. So the
That
Ways
there
and
was-
Means, that's inaccurate.
Are you saying that they did not do their job
I'm
right?
saying the Ways and Means Committee marked up a criminal referral, and I'm saying that the House voted on a criminal referral. So the
They
characterization.
voted out a criminal referral?
Right, you voted no and we voted yes.
Well,
But
what happened to it then? You're in
the
charge.
Department of Justice chose not to pursue it.
On what grounds?
I
That
don't
there was
know.
no
They haven't
evidence there?
disclosed it.
Maybe on these 5 committees, perhaps.
Well, I mean, that's-
But
that's
let's
a-
move on, let's move on.
Fair enough.
Okay, the fact is that one of the main things that we have that you're trying to change is that because Citizens United came into being, the Koch brothers and 2 different committees that they had, plus Karl Rove, spent $130 million in the last presidential election. Did you know that?
Well, I think a lot of people,
Unaccounted
Mrs.
for,
Slaughter, spent
right?
a lot of money in the last couple of elections.
Yes, because Citizens United just opened the doors and they could come from anywhere. And one of the things that a lot of us are concerned with here is it could be the introduction of foreign money. And this country has always been based on the fact that foreign money would not be used in our elections. And now you take away the way we have to prove whether foreign money is here or not. Why do you want to do that?
Because the IRS is in charge of dealing with the tax code, not dealing with the Federal
Right.
Election Commission. So do we think, is it the view that people say, wow, you know what, somebody's going to write down on a form and they're going to disclose if they're trying to manipulate American political election? I don't think that's true. Here's what I do know. I do know that the Internal Revenue Service has abused citizens in the past. I do know that we heard from witnesses, Mrs.
You know-
Slaughter, who came in. Let me just yield, if you just yield, let me
certainly.
just make one quick point. We had a witness who came in before the Ways and Means Committee, and she ran a Right to Life group in Iowa. And she said that she got an inquiry from the Internal Revenue Service when she said, what is it that you do? The Internal Revenue Service sent her written interrogatories, and she said, well, we counsel people and we have prayer meetings. And our Internal Revenue Service said this in writing, tell us about your prayer meetings. Now, if that doesn't cause a shudder down the back of your neck right now, nothing will. The notion that the IRS, in their arrogance, comes forward and says, we're going to be disposing of these questions, these precious First Amendment questions, what I'm suggesting to you is this is an organization that has abused Americans in the past. They don't deserve the confidence that you're giving to them right now.
well-
and even they're admitting that they don't
May
need
I
this
take back my
information.
time?
Of course.
The fact is that after those committees have all met, and the FBI and the general, the statement has been made that no matter how many times the Republican majority makes the claim, it's not true. But keep basing it on, but we're kind of accustomed to that because of what we've heard about Benghazi over and over again, and we'll hear, I feel sure, future, even after 11 hours of testimony, when it was concluded again. And I even heard from one of the Navy SEALs mothers myself that let up already. But one of the most important things that we need to know, if the IRS does have some concern over what comes into elections money, and certainly I do. And I do not want the idea that federal money's there, and I see no reason in the world why people shouldn't say that they are donors. We don't run a secret government here. Transparency is the best thing we offer to the rest of the world, that our government operates in the open. And if we have somebody running one of these agencies that's incompetent and doesn't know how to do it, then I want them gone, just like you do, overnight, frankly. It was one of the most appalling displays that I have ever seen in my life to see her. But because of that one thing, which you built your whole premise around, that because of her, she abused conservative groups, but according to everybody else, she abused everybody. She abused other groups as much as she did. She apparently was a equal opportunity abuser there, and then she's gone. But you continually punish the IRS and take away their budget to the point where they really can't collect taxes anymore. And then to go after impeaching probably one of the best directors we ever had. But I think this bill is dangerous. Again, I don't see any reason for it, and I certainly do hope the Senate won't take it up. I respect your work, you know that. We've talked about that before. But this is just a continuation, I think, of a political. I put it in the same category as Marshall Blackburn's study, but the one I watched about Benghazi, they spent how many millions of dollars, is it? $7 million already trying to find something that everybody says not there. I think citizens of the country deserve better. Maybe maybe some gun legislation. Maybe we could work on at least letting doctors question about guns in the house. You know, we're not allowed to do that because of the health care bill. And the CDC cannot do any kind of research on guns because the NRA made sure of that. Why don't we look at some of that a little bit? Why don't we talk about that? Want to?
I'll put you in the maybe. Are you undecided?
On guns? No, I'm not.
No, are you undecided on this bill?
No way in the world.
All
But
right, well.
that doesn't mean I wouldn't like to talk and certainly be informed, but I know what this is about. We weren't born yesterday. You go through 3 different legislatures. You've seen all this before. I yield back the balance.
Gentlewoman Jill's back. Mr. Roscoe, welcome to the Rules Committee. The gentleman from Georgia recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Roscoe being here. The reference to being a hostile witness rang true for me. I was sitting over here thinking, this is not the hearing I expected to have. And the truth be told, my expectations were set by the President's Statement of Administration Policy. I don't know if you've seen this yet, Mr. Roscoe. What is conspicuous about it is it does not include a notice that either he or his chief advisors will recommend a veto. It does say, in its most salient point, by permanently preventing the IRS from requiring reporting of donor information by 501c organizations, H.R. 5053 would constrain the IRS in enforcing tax laws and reduce the transparency of foundations. To the extent that this Schedule B information is used for the enforcement of tax laws, and to the extent that we would rather the IRS have the ability to bring things, spring them to life and end them through regulation rather than statute, the administration's absolutely right about that. But what I thought I heard you say is Schedule B is so useless in the administration in the enforcement of tax policy that the commissioner himself was thinking about terminating that process. Did I misunderstand you?
That's right, Mr. Woodall. And also the chairman or the director of the exempt organization enforcement group at the IRS both have indicated for the same reason. I mean, look, if you're the Internal Revenue Service, think about what you don't want right now. What you don't want is sensitive, confidential information that you have no capacity or no confidence necessarily that you can hold close in a confidential manner. And if something as controversial as a donor list in a controversial issue, the National Organization for Marriage, they weren't able to hold that close and caused injury and damage and hassle to the entity itself, then why in the world would you want to be burdened as an agency? And if, look, the remedy is we're trying to free up the Internal Revenue Service from mandates that are costly and difficult, here's one that we should all come together on. Let's relieve them of this burden and they can put the money elsewhere.
Well, you cite both cases, that the inability to hold the data close and the the lack of utility in the data. I don't need both of those things to be true. I only need one of them to
That's
be
right.
true. If either of them are true, then we have an obligation here. In case you were feeling like you're a hostile witness, I'll tell you, I have a bill that abolishes the IRS, replaces the income tax with a national retail sales tax. But I try very hard not to go after the individuals who work at the IRS.
Right.
Because 99 times out of 100, whatever it is my constituency doesn't like, it's because Congress did something, passed some ridiculous tax law, allowed some ridiculous mandate to go forward, and now some poor civil servant is required to enforce that. For Pete's sakes, I was with constituents over the weekend, serious, thoughtful constituents who said, Rob, I made a donation to a 501c3, and I received an audit notice 60 days later. I believe those things are connected. I doubt very seriously those things are connected. But it is so dangerous to us in a civil society to think for a moment those things could be related. The beneficiary of your legislation are the individuals who serve in the IRS and are now subject to all of this suspicion, all of these accusations that there's some sort of malfeasance going on. If they don't have the data, we won't have the worry. Far from being an indictment of the IRS, I see this as our responsibility. The IRS is a creature of Congress. The frustrations the American people have with the IRS stem only because of the power this Congress gives to the IRS. And even the White House would not say this is a bill headed towards veto. I thought this was just going to be a small step towards restoring some confidence. I hope in the IRS from folks back home. You may have anticipated the slings and arrows that you'd face today, but I recognize that this is not a bill that goes after the men and women who serve there, but a bill designed to benefit the men and women who serve there as well as the rest.
Mr. Woodall, that's a great point that I'd not thought of insofar as that level of suspicion it's basically the grist for suspicion, and we can remove that, and that's something that I'd not considered before. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
To be crystal clear, though, when the president says that, when the Statement of Administration policy says this could constrain the IRS in enforcing tax laws, if it came to your attention as chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee, if it came to your attention that the IRS became unable to effectively enforce tax law because Schedule B had gone away, would you consider bringing Schedule B back in some other form?
Yeah, I mean, the premise of this is that it is unnecessary. If it became necessary for the Internal Revenue Code to be enforced, then that's a different matter entirely.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to add, and I know I had time, and I probably could have said this then, but it's my hope that the Internal Revenue Service as an agency would recognize some situational awareness about them, that there's a perception of a problem, and that they would make the necessary changes as a professional organization. The men and women of the IRS, including Mr. Koskinen, who I worked with years ago, I had enormous respect for him. It's hard to know because I don't sit on the Committee of Jurisdiction and know all the facts of the case, but it's just my general opinion that the IRS needs to probably understand the gravity of where they're seen, and if it does not make sense for them to do this, that they would make the decisions themselves. But I do think that Mr. Woodall makes an important point. We need to help the IRS in properly enforcing the law, which I do believe in. The reason why is because I try and follow the law myself when I pay my taxes. And I would want other people to do that, and I would want the IRS to do that. I simply don't believe this is an enforcement tool that's necessary to have. And I think that's all we're trying to say here today. Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just be very brief here. I oppose this bill, and and quite frankly, I think if most of the American people were polled about what this bill would really do, I don't care whether they're Democrats or Republicans, I think they'd oppose it as well. I mean, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the presidential campaigns, but on both sides, you got the American people think that this political process is corrupt, that there's all kinds of, money coming into the system that no one knows where it's coming from, and yet this, to me, would add to that suspicion. I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a letter from several reform groups that urge us to vote no on this bill because they say that if this bill were to become law, it would open a loophole for more foreign money to come into our political system. And I got to tell you, I mean, I find it really unusual, and this is not a critique of just Republicans, Democrats as well. They have this social welfare tax exemption that has been claimed by groups like Karl Rove Group, Crossroads, and by Priorities USA Action, which has supported President Obama, I mean, as a way to be able to keep the names of donors basically away from the American people. But they do have to report to the IRS, and I guess going back to this issue of foreign money, if there's nobody keeping tabs on who's giving these donations, who's watching whether or not foreign money is going into these so-called social welfare, organizations? Because foreign money can be given to social welfare organizations, but some of who claim this exemption actually give to, engage in our political, in political advertising and political promotion. So your bill passes. Who watches all this?
Well, I think, so what's interesting to me is that both the commissioner and the person who's in charge of the tax-exempt organizations have said, this is not information that the IRS needs in terms of implementing the tax statute. They don't need it, and frankly, based on the trajectory of their argument, they don't want it because it's such a hassle and it's so complicated.
Who's watching?
It's the Federal Election Commission. It's the Bank Secrecy Act. It's those statutes.
Does the Federal Election Commission get a list of all the donors to?
The Federal Election Commission is in charge of enforcing the federal election statute.
But did they get a list of all the names who give to Crossroads or to Priorities USA? I mean, who?
But why are we telling the Internal Revenue Service, who can't hold this information close, by the way, why are we telling them you need to have this information? Why would we do that?
Because one is they're claiming a quote social welfare tax exemption. I mean, isn't that a?
I don't think so.
Doesn't that fall under the IRS?
Then what does Commissioner Koskinen have wrong about this? That's my argument.
Yeah, anyway, I also ask unanimous consent that I insert in the record the New York Times editorial "Dark Money and the IRS Blindfold" be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Yeah, I think I can understand why, Karl Rove's group or even the Democratic group, Priorities USA, may like what you're doing, but I think from a transparency point of view and from those of us who are concerned about foreign money coming into our campaign system, I think this bill is problematic, and but people will make their own minds up, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas. The gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman, Mr. Stivers. The gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from Alabama.
Yes, sir. Mr. Roscom, you didn't come here to be a hostile witness. You didn't come here to go back to your days in law school to answer a law school question, but I do have sort of a law school question. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case, as I recall, unanimously decided, called NAACP versus Alabama. Sticks in my mind because I'm Alabama. It's from a time that none of us in Alabama are proud of. Back in those days, the Attorney General of the state of Alabama sought a subpoena to get the names and other identifying information of all the members of the NAACP in Alabama for reasons that we now know wouldn't have been good or proper. The NAACP asserted that they could not be subpoenaed because there is a right to associational privacy in America. And so what the Supreme Court decided, and I do believe it was a unanimous decision, was that there is in fact a right to associational privacy. In other words, I have a right to belong to organizations and keep the fact of my membership of that organization private because it's a part of our overall First Amendment rights to speech, assembly, et cetera. Unanimously decided by the Supreme Court. Came up again in the Vallejo decision that essentially validated most of, but not all of, the federal election law. And essentially in that line of decisions, the Supreme Court made a distinction between issue advocacy and candidate advocacy. In other words, if I'm giving money to somebody or I'm supporting somebody that's running for office, then there is a loss of that expectation of privacy because I'm doing that. On the other hand, if I'm giving to an organization but simply advocating on issues is a completely different way the courts address it. So having gone through all that, it strikes me that the practice that you're trying to prohibit in your bill is actually a practice that's already been held unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Am I missing something there?
No, Mr. Byrne, I think that I think that you're on all fours on this issue. In other words, in some of the previous exchange, what I think we've been missing and glossing over is the malevolence of some of this targeting and the corrosive nature of the targeting and the chilling effect of the targeting. So think of Mr. Woodall's example, and the point he made is that, look, maybe this audit didn't happen as his constituent thought it did, but there is a feeling out there, and where does that feeling come from? That feeling comes from the nature of this targeting. So what the court did in the NAACP case was to realize, look, there's got to be a safe place for this type of advocacy, and it recognizes it. And I think that's one of the reasons that the leadership of the Internal Revenue Service says, we don't want to be treading on this. Why? Because they know that they can't hold this information confidentially right now, and they've got a real problem on their hands that they're trying to avoid. So I take your point, and I echo it completely, and I thank you for bringing the committee's attention to it.
And I appreciate you bringing the bill because we know that it can be used for malevolent purposes. That's the reason for the NAACP versus Alabama decision. And so I not only support your bill, I think it's constitutional. I think the Constitution requires that sort of protection for every American, whatever group they belong to. There may be groups that I agree with, maybe groups I disagree with, but it's fundamental to the operation of our democracy under our Constitution and the First Amendment that we have associational privacy. And I think that's all your bill does is put that into statutory law, what's already, I think, clear under the Constitution. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Chairman yields back some gentleman from Florida. Do you see
Thank
the
you very
time?
much, Mr. Chairman.
Jump
Mr.
start
Chairman,
now.
I ask unanimous consent that the statement of the administration policy be made a part of the
That
record.
accept. Is that accept? That'll be-
My good friend, Mr. Woodall, referred correctly to the fact that it does not cite that there would be a veto, but there is, in the first paragraph, a statement that the administration opposes H.R. 50. Sorry, dear. May as well put it all down there, huh? Mr. Roscoe, I associate myself with the remarks and questions that were posed by Mr. McGovern. And I just ask you one portion of it that was left out when Mr. McGovern asked you who then has the oversight or the responsibility, and you said the FCC, or the Federal Elections Commission. The Federal Elections Commission, then Mr. McGovern asked you, do they get a list of all of the donors to these organizations? The Federal Elections Commission.
I don't know off the top of my head. I do know this, that they are charged with administering and enforcing the federal election law. The Internal Revenue Service is not charged. This is not their responsibility. So if the problem is that there's a lack of enforcement, then Congress has a deeper problem that it has to remedy. But my point is, we ought not be disclosing this information to an agency that has demonstrated an incapacity to hold it. And there's also, recognize that there's the Bank Secrecy Act, for example, that puts an affirmative duty on the part, if there is a suspicious banking activity that's untoward, there's a duty under the Bank Secrecy Act. So my point is, let's take away, because there's the commissioner and the tax exempt organization head has said, we don't need this from a tax administration point of view. They don't need it, let's not give it to them.
Okay,
based
then-
on bad actions in the past.
Okay. In your hearing, hearings, and in your discussions with your Democratic colleagues on Ways and Means, some of them, and Mr. Levin included, allowed that this would solidify secrecy. What's your response to that?
I don't understand that. I mean, this is supposed to be secret information at the very beginning, and the jurisdiction of the IRS is limited to the tax to tax administration. So under Section 6103, they're prohibited from disclosing this information.
So is that to all of the 501s or just the ones that the
All of
commissioner
them.
referred to?
All of them.
So then you expand the secrecy in your bill.
So what this bill says is, so let me start with current law, Mr. Hastings, and then try and answer your question. Current law requires the disclosure of Schedule B for 501c organizations.
Correct.
For all of them. This says you don't have to do it. It's that simple.
Yeah, well, I guess my opposition is pretty solid to this kind of thing because I believe in transparency and I'm an advocate of you should report our money when it comes in, whoever you are, and as fast as it comes in and when you spend it. I think that the public has a right to know that, and I personally just have problems with the organizations that are structured in a way that calls campaigns. I think it's ridiculous that we have this election that we're about to witness in November. Both parties will probably spend upwards of $1 billion or $2 billion to get elected. And I think that's crazy. And the outside organizations, and I disagree with Mr. Byrne, I hear him clearly, and on the law, I think he's correct, my colleague and friend from Alabama. But I think it's a joke to believe that these organizations that are issue-oriented organizations are not in some respects coordinated with these campaigns. I just think it's a joke because I see it, we live it, and I think that we should be more transparent. But we're not going to be, at least in the House of Representatives, but like Ms. Slaughter, I hope the Senate doesn't take this up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman,
And thank you, Mr. Ross.
Yes, sir. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Washington, the gentleman, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I appreciate the gentleman from Illinois bringing this bill forward in an effort to protect the free speech rights of the American citizen. Certainly, as we've seen, what could be termed as abuses by the Internal Revenue Service, as well as, I think, that you referenced other agencies, other states. Even there's an example of the California Attorney General also making public-private information as well. So I just appreciate your efforts to put a curb on that kind of activity. Certainly something that we as a Congress should protect, private information and the ability to people to express themselves under the First Amendment. And really don't have any questions other than to thank you for bringing this forward. I look forward to a positive passage and learning more about some of the abuses about this. It makes it even more important that we pass this in legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Mr. Roscom, you just seem to get unanimous agreement around here. It's okay to talk about everything extraneous to this. I did not hear you say that at all. I heard you say this was a common sense, what you felt like would be a bipartisan, really in everybody's best interest to take through legislation and help the IRS to do the tool thing and put it into law because they didn't need it. This has turned into really extraneous issues about the IRS. I hope it does not do that. I think it's simply common sense, a target that you're talking about. So good luck tomorrow on the floor.
Thank you.
Because you're going to need it. Other than that, thank you for taking time. I recognize your time, Mr. Roscom's very important, and I'm glad you didn't hit us with a billable hour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Appreciate your time very much and your consideration.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. The committee now would welcome, is there any other member that would seek to provide information or testimony, H.R. 5053, Preventing IRS Abuse and Protecting Free Speech Act? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 5053. The committee will now open up its what would be the first of several days' worth of testimony that we will receive. This committee is here today to begin the testimony with not only the subcommittee chair, but also the awesome ranking subcommittee member on defense, a gentleman who we all have confidence in, both gentlemen who we have confidence in. And so I want to welcome both of you. We're planning on beginning the debate by doing a rule that would open that up, and then tomorrow the committee will be open for what might be a longer day as we consider amendments that would be against the bill. The gentleman, Mr. Friedlichhausen, you come not only with the experience of this and confidence of this committee, you've been before us before. Mr. Visklosky, you are a friend of this committee, and we count on your testimony also. We're delighted that you're here. If you please remember anything you haven't written or brought, the awesome stenographer would appreciate that. Gentleman, Chairman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all members for your time this afternoon. I come before the committee to present the Appropriations Committee recommendation for the fiscal year 2017 Department of Defense Appropriations Bill and ask for a rule that allows for a robust debate on the issues in our bill. At the outset, I want to thank my partner, Pete Visklosky, to my left for all of his help and friendship and collaboration, and thank all of you on the committee for your input on this bill and your time here this afternoon. Mr. Chairman, our Defense Subcommittee conducted numerous formal hearings and briefings to help this legislation. We also gave members ample opportunity to weigh in on their particular priorities. We had a special hearing just for that. These meetings allowed us to look in great detail into our national defense posture and the capability of our adversaries and partners. We're very concerned by what we see, continued threats by Islamic terrorist organizations, new threats, a more aggressive and capable Russia, an expansion of China, emboldened states like Iran, rogue nations like North Korea, sophisticated and dangerous cyber attacks from all of the above. At the same time, we're dealing with fiscal constraints imposed by sequestration and budget caps. Our recommendation mirrors the funding structure that the House Armed Services Committee introduced last month in its defense authorization bill, which we've now passed, and shifts $16 billion from the President's request for the overseas contingency operations into critical investments in our personnel, training, and equipment, while providing a bridge fund for our overseas operations through the end of April of 2017. By providing a bridge fund to next April rather than making an entire year of funding, this bill is able to make targeted investments across our armed services. Funding for our base requirements totals $532.8 billion, $15.1 billion above the President's budget request. The investments in our bill will allow all of our military services to meet fully their critical training requirements, such as flying hours, tank miles, steaming days, things we need to do relative to facilities and base operations, to reverse, quite honestly, years of reductions in these areas. The bill also increases Army, Marine, and Air Force manning. We boost military strength by 52,000. I'll advise the committee that the recent slide in end strength, combined with the continuous overseas deployments, is directly related to the alarming readiness and training gaps that have been developed over the same time period. In this regard, we've included $6.4 billion above the President's request for key readiness programs to prepare forces, including the National Guard and Reserve, I may add, for combat operations and to perform other peacetime missions. Mr. Chairman, everyone in this room wants to look after our troops and their families. This bill does that. It provides an additional $340 million to fully fund the authorized 2.1% military pay raise. It provides an additional $125 million for peer-reviewed psychological, health, and traumatic brain injury research, and an additional $282 million for cancer research. And one final note, I want to commend you, Mr. Chairman, for your ongoing interest and leadership in the area of the DoD VA electronic medical health records. We had an extended discussion last year. The committee continues to be concerned about the pace of that implementation. but we do give much higher marks to the Department of Defense. Quite honestly, the VA has been lagging, but at some point in time, we need to get it right since the investments we're making in this area are substantial. Frankly, the DoD is currently way ahead of the VA and is now piloting an off-the-shelf solution in the Pacific Northwest. They intend to go live with 30 sites in December of this year. In the meantime, we'll continue to insist that these two systems be completely and meaningfully interoperable. In closing, our recommendation ensures that our military and our intelligence community have the resources that they need to do the job for us to protect us as Americans. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I want to thank Pete Viskolowski also for his close collaboration on this bill.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Pete, we're delighted that you're here. Obviously, your strength with Mr. Freelyheisen enables not only this Rules Committee, but also our as a whole, the Congress to be able to effectively look at the bipartisan work that's being done on behalf of this great nation by the men and women and their families who protect this country every day. The gentleman's recognized.
Chairman, thank you for your kind
Yes.
words. Thank you and all the members for allowing me to testify before you today. I think that the chairman very clearly stated the elements of the bill. I would simply make 3 points. As Chairman Frelinghuysen indicated, this has been a very open and transparent process. The chairman has been very, very open to all members' suggestion. I am delighted that he did have a members-only day so that any member of the House of Representatives could come in, state their position and their concerns on behalf of our national defense and their constituents. I secondly would say again that he did describe the elements of the bill very clearly. Finally, I would simply suggest that I would appreciate an open rule. Given that request, I would also make the observation, if that is not the case, and there is a rule for this legislation, I understand that pending before the committee today, there are over 95+ amendments, and I would suggest respectfully that one of the filters the committee ought to consider is if we had an open rule. There are amendments that are before this committee today that will be subject to be struck because of a point of order, and that might be one place to consider a restriction on those amendments should the committee decide to go in that direction.
Thank you very much. Mr. Frelinghuysen, you struck a chord on me again. I intended to take time to run through the issue of the men and women who leave the military and their records from DOD and the transition that takes place therein. As you probably know, I remain worried not only about the money that has been spent in past years, but really about the effectiveness for the men and women that they deserve better. And I think you clearly said it is still an area that has not been effectively achieved. I will continue to stay after it. I appreciate your heads up on that, and I want you to know that I believe it can be a bipartisan issue, should be a bipartisan issue, and I treat it as a bipartisan issue on behalf of the men and women of our military, and I want to thank both of you for your great work. As always, this committee is increasingly worried about the nation and our security abilities, and we should not put that at risk at this time, and thank you very much. Chairman Cole?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions because I have the privilege of sitting on Chairman Frelinghuysen's Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, and I just want to compliment both the gentlemen for, frankly, it is, as the chairman said and the ranking member affirmed, a very open process and a very collegial committee that, frankly, puts aside partisanship and I think genuinely tries to do the right thing for the country. I know there's some differences over the funding levels and the use of OCO, but those were honestly discussed, and I think we made the appropriate decision of matching up the appropriations with the authorization bill as closely as you can do these sorts of things. But again, much more importantly, I just would commend to my colleagues on this committee. Not all of our sessions are open, of course. Sometimes we're discussing matters that can't be. But if you ever have a chance, you should listened to this subcommittee's deliberations. And I think whether you're Republican or Democrat, you'd come away awfully proud about the quality of the questions, the collegiality of the group, and the genuine effort on both sides of the aisle to try and get through. And I credit both the chairman and the ranking member for setting that tone. We are very, very fortunate as a country that we've got Rodney Frelinghuysen and Pete Visklosky in the positions that they occupy at a really critical point in our country's history. So I just want to compliment both of you, thank you, and tell you what a pleasure it is to serve with each of you, and how proud, frankly, I am of the work product that both of you have managed to produce for us to consider. That'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much, gentlewoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I regret I did not hear you. I was called away for something pretty much importance to us. But I know both of you, and I have enormous respect for the two of you, and I know how hard you work. And I thank you for all that you give. Appreciate that very much. And I will catch up before tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentleman, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our Chairman and Ranking Member for being here today, and certainly appreciate the thoughtful product you've put in front of us. You know, I always think back to one of the very first days after I was elected and arrived here. Then President Bush said to me, "Don't forget your number one job is the defense of your nation." That is our number one constitutional responsibility. So this Defense Appropriations hearing is in the Rules Committee is oftentimes the highlight of my year. But I have to confess to you, this year it's really with a heavy heart that I approach this appropriations bill. I want us to do the right thing as far as paying for the defense of our nation. We can all argue around different aspects of it. And Mr. Chairman, I think you rightly outlined the difficulties this country faces from the Islamic State, from Russia's incursions into the Ukraine, the loss of Crimea, China's aggressive posture it's taking in some of the islands in the South China Sea. Can't forget North Korea, you can't forget Iran. So all of these, any one of these, at any given moment could be an existential threat to our existence, for which our military must be prepared, and that's what the appropriations bill is to do. But I just have to ask myself, are we truly on a war footing right now when it seems like the attacks are constant? And I get that there are people who say that, well, these are lone wolf attacks, these are one-off, but you know, you just run through Boston, the Fort Hood psychiatrist, Garland, Texas, and the Dra Mohammed cartoon, and most recently yesterday, the Orlando attack. These all weren't exactly unknown. These were things that had come on someone's radar screen. I realize there's other events people could point to, but these four strike me just off the top of my head as where there was actually some inclination that there was someone who had malice in their heart toward this country. And you know, I just think back to right after 9/11 when that guy Richard Clark said the system was blinking red. I feel that's the same situation right now. The system is blinking red, and I'm not sure we're reacting to it in the correct way. And I do not pretend today to have answers for you. I just wanted to share the anxiety that I know constituents that I represent back home are feeling. I hear it from them. I hear it from family members. I had a member of my own family who asked, of these 8,000 people that are on this hit list from ISIS, are you on that list? I don't know. I don't know if any member of Congress is, but these are serious questions that Americans are asking themselves today. So I would just ask you, as we approach a defense appropriations bill, are we keeping topmost in our mind the defense of our nation? And I'm happy to hear from both of our witnesses.
Absolutely, and I think, as you know, as we gather here, we have about 265,000 military around the world doing the work of freedom. I know that sounds rhetorical, but across the Middle East, we have the best of America. We have a super role that's been taken by our special operators, but we got Marines on the ground. And one of the parts that we agree with, Peter and I, on just everything, we need more intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance. We need to have more eyes in the sky but certainly we've got the best America on the ground. And certainly, I serve on the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee. I think Jay Johnson's doing a good job running a very complex agency, but certainly we have to respect the Constitution in terms of what we're involved with here, but abroad we're certainly keeping an eye on the bad guys in many different fronts. It is more than just the Islamic State. It's an aggressive Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and we have to, I think we've provided our military and our intelligence community with the assets they need to protect us.
Mr. Burgess, I would simply add that there are 17 intelligence agencies under the subcommittee's jurisdiction as far as funding, and one of the primary responsibilities the chairman and I feel we have is to make sure that there is coordination and appropriate sharing of the information that is garnered, but also, and the chairman and yourself mentioned the Constitution, that we have a very specific constitutional role. And because for some of these notification issues on the issues you are concerned about, rightfully so, there are very limited numbers of this institution that get it. There have been instances, and the chairman has been very aggressive regardless of the administration, where there has been a failure under the law to inform us so we can exercise our constitutional oversight to come down hard and to make sure that does not happen again in those particular instances. The chairman has been dogged in that particular effort.
Well, again, I do not question the sincerity of anyone who is serving in the armed forces today, and of course we are all grateful for their service, but honestly, I do have to ask myself if we're providing the correct leadership and direction from the commander-in-chief on down, when you regard each of these events that I discussed as a one-off or lone wolf event, and no one's connecting the dots that desperately need to be connected, we should be on a war footing, and my fear is that we are ignoring that, and we're ignoring that at the peril of the American citizen, and for that I am very fearful. I do appreciate, Mr. Chairman, that you included in the bill right at the end, on page 169, the discussion of the authorization for use of military force. And I agree with you where it says in the bill, Congress has a constitutional duty to debate and determine whether or not to authorize the use of military force against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. We do need to have that discussion. We do need to show the American people that we get it and that we're concerned and we're prepared to do what is necessary to be victorious in this. Until only when and if we do that will I think that people will regard us as serious in our resolve in this. But I just have to tell you, the events of the last 36 hours have left me pretty disappointed, pretty pessimistic about what the immediate outlook is when it comes to the defense of our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman does not seek time. Judge Hastings, gentleman does not seek time. Mr. Post does not seek time. Does any other member of the committee seek time? Gentleman from Alabama.
I just wanted to thank both the chairman and the ranking member. I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee. Y'all have done an excellent job with this bill. But more than that, I've come before you every one of the 3 years I've been in Congress during your members' day, the courtesy you show to members on both sides of the aisle. I know you're listening carefully to us. I want to thank you both for that and every member of your subcommittee. You're a great example of bipartisanship where we put America first and everything else second, and I very much appreciate what you've done.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just wanted to briefly thank the chairman and the ranking member for such good work. I just had the privilege of spending a few days at Fort Hood, Texas. Was able to join a group of active Army, National Guard, and Reserve members in a joint exercise, being able to witness some of the hard work they're doing in order to decrease the amount of time they can mobilize to respond to some of the issues that have been mentioned that we're facing around the world and an ever more dangerous world that we face. But the one thing that I think I came away with was the necessity for them to be able to do their job of protecting our country, they need to have consistent, strong resources from us. And so I very much appreciate the work that you've done to provide that. And there are young men and women, as we sit here in this air-conditioned room, that are enjoying the dust and the hot Texas sun as we speak, working very hard on our behalf. And I just want to underscore that it's necessary for us to work as hard as they do to provide for the safety of our nation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony today. This ends. Is there any other members seeks to give testimony? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 5293. Chair will be receive a motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 5053 a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee, print 114-58, shall be considered as adopted and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides a general debate rule for H.R. 5293, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act of 2017. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that no further consideration of the bill shall be in order except pursuant to a subsequent order of the House. Section 3 of the rule provides that Section 10,002 of H.R. 5293 shall be considered to be the spending reduction account for purposes of Section 3D of House Resolution 5. Section 4 of the rule provides that during consideration of H.R. 5293, it shall not be in order to use a decrease in the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund to offset an amendment that increases an appropriation not designated as Overseas Contingency Operations Funds or vice versa. This section does not apply to an amendment between the houses. Finally, Section 5 of the rule provides that during consideration of H.R. 5293, Section 3304 of Senate Concurrent Resolution 11 shall not apply.
You've heard the motion now from the gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole. Is there amendment or discussion to that, gentlewoman? Ms.
Yes, sir,
Slaughter?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 5053 and H.R. 5293, each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Thank you very much. The committee is aware of the circumstances that surround this. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on Slaughter amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it, noes have it.
Roll call.
Gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox. Mr. Cole. Oh. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk,
no.
report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee strike Section 4 of the rule. Mr. Chairman, Section 4 prevents amendments from using OCO funds to increase base budget programs. Isn't this a bit ironic since the underlying bill does just that, using OCO funds to pay for base budget programs?
Thank you very much. Discussion. Seeing none, the vote will now be on the McGovern. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Noes have it,
for
noes
roll
have
call,
it.
Mr. Chairman. Accordingly, gentleman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. No. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers. Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Byrne. No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Yes.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk
no.
report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Motion's not agreed, amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion, seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Accordingly, the gentleman, Mr. Byrne, will be handling this for Republicans. Mr. McGovern will be handling this for Democrats. It is my expectation that we will meet tomorrow afternoon at 3:00 p.m. For continuation of round 2. That will include amendments. I want to thank each member for being here. Gentlemen, Mr. Burgess. We do. There probably is not around the conflict, but I will review that, but we're probably going to come up and get started. We have a long day. We have 100 amendments, and I intend to do that. I'd encourage members to go down and vote. I'd like to, at this time, thank the following people that we have who are college interns who are here today. Juan Varela, Wichita Falls, Texas, from Washington University in St. Louis. Brent Golden from Denver City, Texas, with Baylor University. Joseph Adams from Bethesda, Maryland, Georgetown Preparatory School, where he's a senior. Casey Levitt, Frisco, Texas, University of Arkansas, just graduated. Dania Adams, who's from Bethesda. Dania Adams, who's from Bethesda, Maryland, National Cathedral School senior. Sammy Minkowitz, who is from Houston, Texas, University of Texas, a junior. And Lexi Fields, Houston, Texas, Southwestern University, a junior. These students are up for policy discussions and a summer intern program in my office. I want to thank all the members for their work today. This closed the hearing portion today.